even though I'm in LA, it's not a Hollywood production studio here, so,
All right, well, I'm Talia for Rubin. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work in the Human Services Department for the City of Oakland in the division called Community Housing Services Division, where homeless services lives, including programs for street-based outreach, unsheltered homelessness, transitional housing, some permanent supportive housing, shelter, all of those things. My role in the Community Cabins project has been being really the human services lead. So working out the program design, securing the actual operators of the site, helping with the design to be human-centered and client-centered and how we think about the work and the location, the size of the cabins, really going from complete experiment to what we now have actually been able to replicate and codify. The total bed count before COVID was 232. Our maximum right now is about 200. So we've taken some beds out. We've kept one unit empty entirely at each of our cabin sites for isolation if we need it. Just that's the COVID response.
My name's DeVries. I work in the City Administrator's office. My title now is Director of Interdepartmental Operations, but really with homelessness for a few years, I was really the City Administrator's point person, which means, all departments report to the City Administrator. So it's kind of a holistic approach to homelessness. I oversaw the encampment management team, which was Public Works, OPD, Human Services, actually going out and working at encampments, as well as developing these community cabin sites. So my role was to pick which encampment we were going to build a cabin site for, because these were originally geographic interventions. Find a site to put the cabins on, and then work with contractors and Jim, to build them, to get them online. Worked a lot on the site design with Talia, and also did a lot of the fundraising that we did, because we got a lot of private outside money and in-kind support. So I got the opportunity to go shake trees and make it rain a little bit for the project. I also got to be pretty.
And we'll go into that in a little more detail, because I think that's worth bringing attention to as one unconventional but highly scalable funding model out there.
Yeah, and I also kind of became the public face for the city on homelessness, which was both fun, exciting, and also extremely painful, depending on which day of the week it is. I got stuck in front of the TV cameras a lot, and at public meetings doing the public community engagement around these cabin sites, and around the city's other actions with encampments, which, it sometimes got highly controversial. And so, when you're the public face, it's good or bad. You either, get praised or yelled at, honored or ridiculed. So you got it all.
Yeah, my name is Jim Moore. I'm president of Sustainable Urban Neighborhoods. We're a local developer. On these projects, I was acting as, on a pro bono basis, the project manager, and in some cases as the contractor. On this particular project, I kind of did both. Worked with Joe pretty closely on pretty much all aspects of it, and Talia. We had a pretty amazing public-private partnership that included a number of different agencies and people and companies. Piatuck Architects designed all the sites pro bono. The chamber raised quite a bit of money and was a pretty good partner. And some of the departments within the city, like the police department, how they were just amazing on how well they managed the population of people, especially as we started developing the site, dealing with people who are already there, along with DPW, just dealing with trash removal, human services, just all the various departments, and the different partnerships that we had were pretty amazing.
So I am Tomika Perkins with Operation Dignity. I am the operations director here, and I oversee the homeless mobile outreach teams, as well as 4 of the community cabins operated or ran by the City of Oakland. We were responsible for setup and the day-to-day operations, as well as occupancy of the community cabins here in Oakland. So Operation Dignity is a homeless veterans organization. So we provide emergency, transitional, and some permanent housing for homeless veterans. that is a part of our main mission. And then we also do the homeless mobile outreach as a extension. We have 100 veteran beds that we operate, and then we have 120 community cabins.
So I like to call it, have a menu of options for those who are unsheltered, and there's different pathways out of unsheltered homelessness. So these, what we call emergency crisis beds, is one. And under this is the community cabins. It's our emergency shelter, traditional congregate shelter. We also have our RV safe parking program, which is sort of somewhere in between those two. And then we have our traditional brick and mortar transitional housing, and then our permanent supportive housing program. So those are sort of different pathways. So it's aligned with the understanding that we don't have the inventory in the moment for those permanent affordable housing slots, whether supportive or otherwise, right, in the general market either. So we really brought in these programs. The community cabins is that respite and stabilization piece. So from curbside communities before brick and mortar, but it doesn't have to be in that order, if that makes sense.
Right. And as far as the scope of this whole program, so there's now 6 projects open. So and roughly how many people is this initiative serving now across the 6 sites?
Yeah, so we've stood up 7 sites. We are currently operating 6. We've reduced some of our sites' capacity as a result of COVID, right? So we've decompressed, and vulnerable folks are in single occupancy.
For talking about the context of this program, so this launched a couple years ago. The homelessness crisis isn't something that just happened in the past couple years in Oakland. It's certainly reached new heights with pretty large increases over the recent years, but sort of what was the tipping point of the homelessness crisis to enact this program?
December 7th will be 3 years since we stood up our first site, and I'm really into anchoring anniversaries. Joe and Jim and Tomika know that. I send anniversary emails every year because I think it's really important to hold space for that and see what we've accomplished. I think we started really talking about it out of this need for crisis emergency beds, but seeing our congregate shelters not at 100% occupancy. And that's where the tension really was from the human services side. It was like, what aren't we providing to bring people indoors? And 3 years ago, we had a pretty brutal winter. And it was it was 4 years ago, we had a really brutal winter. And we were sort of thinking around, well, what do we need to do to really get these shelters utilized, or what's the lack of utilization around? And we looked at Human Services did the research around different municipalities and trying to get really creative about what we do. Joe, at the same time, and he can speak to this, was getting some of those ideas in place too. And they were coming from advocates, they were coming from inside the city around what do we need to do differently, and there was an interest. I've been with the city 5.5 years, and we were talking about how numbers are going to go up, and we were saying this as soon as I started. It was like, we're at this little bit of, like, we're seeing a little bit, but you see in the last 2 iterations of the pit count, numbers have gone up consistently. So that's really where it was, what do we need to do to serve people better? Rather than asking people to come into what we have, what do we need to do to bring people in? And it was really changing the approach of the work to be more social worky.
well, just curious, what was the occupancy or vacancy of the congregate shelters? Like, was it?
I mean, it would go up and down, of course. It would go up and down. I mean, there were times we were very close to full occupancy. Our winter shelters were definitely getting utilized, but our per person cost versus where were they going at the end of winter, right? It's always that tension at the end of a winter shelter. Where's everybody going? And I think we really wanted to get to a place where we're investing in the front end so those exits are positive rather than just bringing people in during cold weather.
My background in city government has been around addressing problems in neighborhoods. It's been very geographically based and trying to coordinate different departments. And so I was operating these area response teams that the city had created that, in different parts of the city, it's like, oh, what's going on over here? We've got a park that needs to be rehabilitated. We'll bring in, our parks people will bring in some grant money, do a site design, engage the community. And what happened was, as I was on these teams, more and more, the only problem being presented to us was homelessness. People just said, look, our neighborhood's great, except there's this massive encampment. Right. And it's blocking the street, it's blocking the bike lane, it's causing a huge rat infestation, there's crime, there's fires, all the things that are associated, and the encampments were getting larger and larger. And the amount of material at the encampments was getting larger and larger. And we had some Goldman students, one of whom is now the policy aide to the mayor. But we had these grad students that came to the city, and we asked them to work on a research project with us. And kind of the theme that came out of it was, if we can't find housing for everybody and they're going to be on the street, could we at least give them somewhere to camp that would be less, that would reduce the harm? And so we first started, we jokingly called it Camp Oakland. Like, gee, what if you had a place where people could pitch their tent, have a certain area, have some rules? But then we tried this pilot thing called compassionate communities. If we provide you porta potties and garbage service, and we put up some K-rails on this kind of unused street block, will you move into here and not encamp the rest of the neighborhood where you're right in front of somebody's front yard or blocking the driveway? And people overwhelmingly responded in a positive way. Like, they moved in quickly, far more quickly than we thought they would. But the site was rife with problems. We hired a full-time case manager to help get those people placed into housing. And we were really successful getting a lot of them placed, but more would move in, and there were no rules. So we had case management, we didn't have site management. The site caught on fire a couple of times. The final time it burned down, and it was like, oh, damn, that didn't work. And so what we realized was, if we're gonna create a place for people, you have to have site management. You have to have more structure than what that first go at it did. And then we saw this county, or Yuba County, outside of Sacramento, Yuba, that had used these tough sheds to create this little village. And so we ran with that. So that was really the impetus. So for me, I mean, I don't come from a clinical background. I come from a kind of broader background for the city. Like, how do we balance all of the city neighborhoods' needs? And it really was born out of that.
The sequence of events was the city declaring this crisis or emergency ordinance, and then that freed up sort of Joe to do some site negotiation to find this site, or sort of what gave you the go ahead to move forward?
The declaration kind of exempted us from a lot of state and local laws so that we could move in an emergency. And so, I don't have to get 3 bids on a contract. Don't have to, go through CEQA. Didn't have to go through a lot of typical permitting processes. So that, and any city can do that. And actually many cities have now since in the past few years. But the funny thing is, the city had declared a shelter crisis actually like a year earlier, but we hadn't acted on it. So there was some internal inertia at the city. I think those of us on the ground saw this problem coming like a wave, and we didn't quite have the attention of all of our decision makers yet. And then when those encampments started to just explode in size, all of a sudden we had everyone's attention. And so that gave us a lot of latitude. The mayor said, don't be afraid to fail. And she was very forgiving about us going out on a limb and doing this stuff. And that was really helpful as well. Knowing that we could try this thing. It's a pilot, everything's a pilot. And we built the plane as we flew it. And then, we had this one really large encampment, and right next to it was a vacant parcel that Caltrans had just sold to a private developer. And then PG&E leased it out from under us. I wanted to lease it. PG&E leased it for a construction project. And I went to PG&E, I said, hey, you guys don't really need this whole site, do you? And like, it would be good community relations if you would just give us 15,000 square feet of it. We want to do this homeless intervention. And that was where the first site was born at.
And this is the 6th in Castro site that we have listed as like the pilot site on that list.
So the private owner who just bought the site from Caltrans wasn't going to be ready to develop it into housing, for a number of years. Those projects have a pretty long pipeline. And so he leased it to PG&E, temporarily, and then we subleased it and said, we took a corner of it, so it was free.
Called as a services in place model, just to give it that clinical, that's what we went to human services, and Joe, we all looked at this as different iterations of kind of the same thing of like serving everybody where they are, right? Being that geographic, this is a community, let's serve them. It's called the services in place model versus actually building a program and having people move in.
Got the approval from council, I think, in September of 2017, and we wanted to get something up and running fast, and ended up, you know, we didn't do a very good job on site design for that first site. We didn't think it out as people oriented. It looked like a barracks. The cabins that we picked with the tough sheds were really substandard. They had the big barn door on them. The latch didn't work well. They only had one little window in the back. They were dark. They had no insulation. They were drafty. And but we got Sutter Health to pay for them. I had gone to the Oakland Builders Alliance of Developers that you know are working on interest in Oakland, and they had me as a guest speaker, and they were complaining about homelessness and the impact it's having on the city. So I went back to them. I said, "Hey guys, well, we've got this idea. Can you help us in kind?" And that's where Jim came along, and he really pushed and got you know, a firm to donate the crushed rock and to come in and do the grading in kind, and we got fencing, you know, from North American Fence. And so Jim really helped spearhead that effort with the developers to get that first site up and running. We had the city's emergency shelter declaration as our, you know, get out of jail free card, that we didn't have to abide by all of the CEQA findings and zoning requirements. You know, we made these things 120 square feet, so they didn't need a building permit. You know, we didn't give them electricity, so there was no electrical to worry about, which later we realized was not necessarily the right way to do it. And so, but we put it up fast. I mean, Jim's team was working through Thanksgiving.
We had the provider, right? We could open, but if nobody was going to actually staff the site or be willing to go on this limb for us or with us, then nothing would happen. So, I mean, that's where the city's relationship with our providers is really crucial. Some of them hate that we're in the weeds with them on a regular basis, but that's kind of how we do our work in Oakland. We're in it with you, for better, for worse. So we approached Operation Dignity, being our really trusted, you know, grantee. We'd worked together for years, and their relationship with people in that specific area, and just their street smarts and their willingness to pilot something was crucial, right? Like, again, if we didn't have somebody to operate it, there would be nothing to open.
Yeah. So as Talia said, the city came to us with this idea. Again, Operation Dignity provides the outreach services for the city of Oakland, right? So that's kind of how our relationship continues to build. So when the city approached us with, would we be interested in doing site management for the community cabins, we were all for it, being that we already kind of knew the community, you know, but it has to go up quick. It's going to be fast. Everything is not in place. You know, you may not have everything that you need, but we need to get this open ASAP. So we kind of came in hiring through the holidays, because I think we opened around the holidays was approaching. So
and we were on a union strike, though.
We were on a strike.
That's the other thing.
Yes.
Just so happened
Yes.
About that part.
that the union was on strike, Charlie. Just so you know, there was that added little.
So
element.
you knew that that's
Yes.
where you had to get all the free labor, sort of.
Right. Right. So that was a very challenging time, because again, it was a pilot program, right? So you have people who was for it and you have folks who were against it. So we were bumping up against all of these different challenges, especially it being something new that we now had to present to our encampment community about coming in. And this is, this is moving in a different direction.
I am a member of the chamber, and I've been part of a few of their, the land use committee, for example, from its inception. But the Oakland Builders Alliance is another group that I'm a board member of. And we have been collaborating with various departments of the city, particularly the building department, for a long time. And the mayor has been pretty active in that process. And I think it just occurred to her that maybe the Builders Alliance could be of use. And she gave us a call. Joe came over, and basically they said, we need help. And our membership stood up, and we built the first site pretty much pro bono. And I kind of, for some reason, just stuck with it and kept doing the project management. I think part of my motivation was that my time has been really highly leveraged. We've accomplished so much with the ability to do it the way that we're doing with the emergency resolution. I think the word temporary has been really operative as well. So a temporary emergency housing site has kind of cleared the way to get things done in a way that you don't get to do in my world. You know, usually it takes to do it. One of these sites would take, you know, years probably, costs a lot of money, and it'd be very difficult to even get approved. So it was kind of fun to be able to just come in, work. You know, Joe and I worked really pretty much hand in glove on a lot of the development of the sites, and I'd say we were really efficient. We got things done quickly. The first site we got open in 4 weeks after I first met Joe. It was open. It's interesting though, on that first one, we had a lot of skepticism. While we were building it, we had, you know, people were not happy that we were there working on the site because they were viewing it how they were viewing it.
When you say people, you're saying the people that were sleeping nearby.
The unhoused population were literally on the other side of the fence. You know, we were in there grading and digging and whatever, and building fences. By the second site, even the first couple of days I was on that site, people were walking up to the fence and saying, "Hey, how do I get in here? Who do I talk to? I've heard about this." They already, the word had already spread from the experience of the people in the first camp.
Right.
And then by the time we got to Lake Merritt, they actually had spokespeople, and they were organized, and they had demands, and it was like, okay. And Joe figured out a way to get, you know, with Talia and Joe and engaged, actually got them to relocate out of our path and over onto the sidewalk. And the understanding is they then moved into the camp. It evolved really quickly. It was pretty amazing.
I think part of that was that we went through, right? We built December 2017 was Castro. May 2018 was Northgate. October 2018 is Lake Merritt. Then July and August was Mandela. Sorry, January was Miller. Then July, August of that year, right? We forget Miller. July and August that year was Mandela, and then January, right? They kind of came like
sort of like a quarterly rhythm or something.
Exactly, and it was really nice. And then we closed. You know, Castro was stood up for 1 year, which was good because that site really was the pilot, and we repurposed some of those units. Jim, you can speak to that, right? We repurposed some of those units, used them as single occupancy somewhere else. We didn't waste anything we had spent on Castro. It was a really good lesson. Like we learned so much from that experience.
We learned, we definitely learned a lot. Even during that process, so much hard and good work is done. People are reconnected to services or to family members, or a lot of people are actually served before they even enter the camp. And it's a pretty amazing process to watch.
Just to recap, I mean, the overall mission of these transitional community cabin projects is to move people into permanent housing, which I think is sort of important to highlight here. So like as far as the 200 or 230 bed space capacity, how many people now have moved into permanent supportive housing? Has it been as transitional as you had assumed it would be from the onset?
So I guess there's a couple of things I would start with. First to say is that actually the premise is to end on people's unsheltered status. I'm not sure that is always the first step is going to be permanent, like meaning your exit from community cabins may not essentially be permanent housing, but you're on your pathway there. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like the way that you put that.
Yeah, and so our premise actually is respite and stabilization in order to enable and further you along to end your unsheltered status. That's really like the tagline to it. So you have somewhere safe, your things are there, you can go get your ID, you can keep your documents, you could get a job, right? Like there's different things that you're able to do when you could lock a door, like as simple as that, right?
Right. Well, so I guess to move to the next section of funding or site, which one came first? Did we, I guess, looking to the second site, was the second site found and then you went out and like did this grant application to the state, or did you have the funding already before you had the site?
No, so I had my eye on Northgate as the next biggest encampment that we needed to address, but we didn't know where we were going to put it. And the mayor brought the district director of Caltrans to visit the Castro site and see what we had done. Because, I've been working with Caltrans for a number of years on all of the issues they have in Oakland. And that director was, you know, he's an old school director, you know, bureaucrat, but he had a heart. I've known him like 20 years. But the mayor brought him to the site, and I thought he was going to cry when he heard some of the people's stories. He met a woman that I think Tomika introduced him to, and she said, you know, I have a heart condition and high blood pressure, and I moved into this cabin, and when I went to my doctor a couple of weeks ago, my blood pressure has dropped down to normal for the first time in years. And that moved him. Like he saw what we did at Castro. And a week later, I remember I was standing in the garden section at Home Depot, and the mayor called me and said, Caltrans is going to give us the Northgate property. And I was like, what? So the director basically told his staff, lease the city this parcel at Northgate, you know, for $500 or whatever. It was a ridiculous amount. Give it to them so they can build another cabin community. And so we were off to the races then.
That's when you got your work gloves in the aisle of the garden center at Home Depot.
Yes,
you got your work gloves to get to work.
Exactly. What happened was then we actually got state legislation passed that requires Caltrans to lease us any property for $1 a month for homeless interventions. And that's true for anyone now. I mean, so it actually created state legislation. But having that site for free, it was already fenced. There was an electrical opportunity, additional lights to provide lighting, but we also tapped into Caltrans lighting system, and we got them to agree to let Jim build a box. So the electrical was done on the slide, kind of. And then what happened was people saw the Castro site and they saw the miraculous change driving down the street. Like there was a massive encampment, and now there's not, and now there's people are living in these little, you know, cabins. That brought people out of the woodwork. And so we were able to start getting more money for the whole project. So before you knew it, I take this older gentleman who owns a lot of parking garages in Oakland. He looked at the Castro site. He said, what can I do to help you at Northgate? I'm like, well, you know what? To finish the fencing, we need $15,000. So we wrote a check for $15,000. The Chamber of Commerce said, look, funnel it all through us. We'll raise money for you. We'll go out to our donors. And then if you go out to donors, instead of having to get people to give money to the city, then we have to go accept the money, go to council, and there's all sorts of paperwork, and then the purchasing is impossible. We just said, you know what, give your money to the chamber. And then when we had a purchase, we told the providers that the chamber will make the purchase for you. And so that was one of the ways we skirted bureaucracy. I went and met with Clorox. They gave us $50K. We went to Target. I think we got $25K. We went to Home Depot and got $25K plus some volunteers. And then we had some neighbors, like just average people wanting to do fundraisers. So like they set up a fundraiser at a restaurant, and I go to the restaurant and like we walked out of there with like $50,000. So it was really cool to have that momentum to pay for things on the front end. They couldn't pay for program, but they could pay for the construction costs. And then Jim working his magic with developers, getting them to donate in kind or at cost. Really stretched our dollars so that we could open up these sites low budget.
So yeah, Kaiser, Sutter, those places helped us a lot with that first and second.
Did this momentum of various organizations in the chamber wanting to step in and help, did it come into play, I guess, after you had that first site and people started visiting it and sort of seeing what the program was already all about, or sort of what was the I guess tipping point for getting people?
The first site got money from Sutter to buy the cabins. I think that was the one big contribution, and then the in-kind donations from our contractor friends. But then once people saw it and they saw the difference, that's what really I think opened up the door.
About $10,000 checks, $5,000 checks. Just people were definitely stepping up all over the place. I think I probably collected close to $100,000 in $5,000 and $10,000 checks here and there. But basically, it was the mayor and Joe shaking trees, and I was running around with a basket collecting what was falling out.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I was about to say, Joe, what was your speech that you gave?
Look, the program kind of speaks for itself. You see the cabinet, especially once we got Northgate built, because let's face it, Castro was ugly.
Yes.
Castro was an ugly site. And thank God, this is really a funny moment. The mayor sends me an email hey, this guy, Mike Piatok, wants to help out with the cabins. You should reach out to him. And I guess he had won at some fundraiser at breakfast with the mayor, and he told her he'd like to help out. I had no idea who the guy was. I didn't know he was a world-renowned developer of affordable housing or architect who designed affordable housing. A lot of times you get the person who wants to help out, but they want to do what they want to do, and they're a pain in the butt. So I call Mike, and he's like, yeah, I'd like to help you with the site design. I'm like, oh, okay. And then it was just amazing how he designed these sites, like the Northgate site, to work with limited space in a manner that made it feel like a community.
Most shelters don't have the outcomes that we do. Part of that is our staffing model, right? We have 25 clients to every one housing navigator. We're really clear about staying into that best practices ratio. I think having staff on site all the time is great. And we have a big old bucket of flex funds, which is all about like really the most unrestricted bucket of money that you can imagine to be able to reduce any barrier to somebody's housing options. Right?
To cover a little bit of this funding and finance aspect of it, so is that the money that's coming from the state under HEAP and HAP, those one-time or emergency grants that's going to the city?
For the human services, yeah, that's the funding we use. Jim and Joe can talk about where their other money comes. Some of it is HAP and HEAP, some of it isn't. But we did get an operations grant from Kaiser, actually, for Northgate for our first year. And we used some of that for the site management staffing. So we were able to supplement because HEAP was about to run out. Then HAP was, we weren't sure HAP was going to happen, right? So HAP happened. That's funny. I just realized what that sounded like. Package it in a way. I mean, that's the other piece too. Like we knew we needed better these types of cots, or we needed these bins. Like, I mean, we also knew how to put it together and be like, this is our wish list. And I could send it to Barb at the chamber. And she was like, whatever you want. And I was like, what? There were costs we passed through to Tomika and her team through their grant. And there were things that we asked for through in-kind donation. And we learned how to differentiate between those things. The providers told us, don't buy these blankets anymore, buy these ones, right? I mean, that's just part of the deal, is how to figure out, it's just from the learning and being open to that learning. Don't get stuck in just doing it one way, keep learning.
And then the synergy just was amazing. So when you go look at the Northgate site, you're like, wow, it's beautiful. Like the color of the cabins that we picked was nice. We changed the shape of the cabin to be 8 by 15 instead of 10 by 12. So they spread them out so that inside the cabin, it feels twice as large. Even though it's the same square footage, it feels way larger. We put in double pane insulated windows, 2 in the front, 1 in the back. The one in the back serves as a fire escape. We put a regular door on that you have like at your house with a deadbolt. And
oh my God, Joe, do you remember playing on the Tough Shed site and me and you being on the site being like, pick this door, let's look at this color, let's see this trim. I mean, it was actually really fun. It's fun. I mean, I know it sounds dorky, but it's really fun. I love picking the colors for the sites. That's been one of the silliest fun things I get to do.
Yeah, it really changed things having that aesthetic. And then we added, we added insulation. Ultimately we added, sheetrock, and but more importantly, we added electricity. But we did a low grade, and I think this was Jim's idea. Bring in 12-volt electricity so people can plug in USBs in their cabin. It avoids the fire hazard and the electric and the regulations and the expense of full electric, but it still gives people the ability to charge their cell phone.
Again, that encampment had grown enormously. It was spilling out on all sides of the street. And I think the very last thing that happened was a resident it was a hit and run on that street, and a resident had got killed from the hit and run. And then the second incident was a fire, and one had got burned alive in so that was kind of like that last kind of push for the community to say, like, what can we do to get involved? We had so many volunteers with wanting to bring food, wanting to make sure they had hygiene kits, bringing them things for the holidays. Like, we had so much support at Northgate that we didn't have at Castro. So it was like those lessons learned and those brief modifications that we were able to make that made the living experience there different, also allowed us that opportunity to kind of bring in the community more and build that relationship.
It was a pretty big unsightly place, and it was really dangerous. It was hard to drive around. You always felt like you were going to hit somebody. It was a big problem, and that camp or the community cabins really cleaned that up so much. I think that was kind of a poster child for the for the program.
Community engagement process is really important, but once we hit the first site, people were skeptical in their surrounding area. They really, they were so, they were skeptical. And when we transformed things, some of those people were willing to come to our next community meeting to say, hey, they did this in my neighborhood, and let me tell you, it's awesome. And that really helped us. And then we had people from Northgate come to the Lake Merritt meeting. The Lake Merritt meeting was the biggest one we had. We had like 250 people there. We had advocates there, calling us, saying that we're putting people in concentration camps, but they lacked credibility because people were like, look, we've seen this, we've seen Northgate at work. So like, that really helps you, but it's also really important that you do that. To get that community buy-in. And the other thing is we made a covenant with the community that we haven't been able to entirely keep. We said, look, if you let us build this site, if you watch us build this intervention, you're not gonna have these homeless encampments because we're not gonna allow them where we have the intervention. So the surrounding community had skin in the game. There was a benefit to them. I would tell them, we're going to take chaos and we're going to create order. We're going to take unregulated, unsheltered encampments where you've got fires and crime and death and despair and rats. And we're going to create a regulated, safe respite center for people to live safely. And you as a neighbor will be safer.
Tours there, or how are people getting familiar with it besides,
Absolutely.
I guess, just driving by at 40 miles an hour?
Yes.
Were people able to like come in and visit, or how was it marketed to the public?
We invited people in. I mean, I think the nature of having volunteers come on weekends spreads the word. People see it. The media could come in before we open. We do not allow media on any site once we open. That's been a ground rule. We also did our unsheltered community meeting, which included housed people. They could come too. We would flyer and say community meeting. We did it on the site itself. And we were already building some of the units so people could look at them. I think that was another sort of unique feature that we were able to have.
Was that outreach was, although we were surveying people and asking them questions, it was more important as we were providing them honest information. Because there is a group of advocates that is out there in Oakland that is misinforming people about what these programs are.
As a response to some criticism also is Joe and I actually went and did a survey of everybody on 27th, on Northgate, and on Sycamore. We developed a little, one pager and went and talked to people about what their service priorities were, what were their deal breakers to not come in, right? Like just having more communication.
Adding things that maybe the congregate shelters didn't have, like they can bring their pets, right? We were providing storage, right? Like some of the things that they were resistant in coming in because they couldn't do, right? We took those into considerations. All of our sites have dog parks, right? All of our sites have extra shelters. Extra storage spaces, so we kind of listened and built those things into the program.
The cabins are not for everyone. This is not a one size fits all. It's not going to work for everyone. And it was never, in my opinion, never did we communicate that we thought this was the be all end all solution. Never did the city say that. None of us have ever put that out into the universe. But that's sort of the response we got, is as if this was going to be the only thing the city was ever going to do for unsheltered folks. So
yeah,
I think
it's hard to take like a soundbite and add the context, I guess, around it, of like, this is not the only thing. This is just one of many solutions.
Correct. Times where we say cabins are not a good fit for this person. Right. We are not like extreme acute mental health issues. The cabins aren't the place. If you have to be in a roommate with somebody in a 15-by-8 site and you're highly, you're having a schizophrenic episode and you refuse to take medication, that's a safety concern for everybody on the site, especially the client themselves, right? So we've made decisions where that's not the right fit. So we don't it's not like a herd that we're just herding everybody and because that's an accusation that sort of comes up, that we're herding everybody into the cabins. We make clinical and I believe sound decisions with the information given at any one time about whether or not we really think
so our messaging was very crucial and getting people to understand, like, this is something new, this is a pilot, you know, we're trying to answer your questions as best we can. We were doing community meetings with the encampment residents. We were doing community meetings with the businesses and residents in the area, right? Trying to make folks aware of what was coming and what it would look like. And this is what we were trying to do so that we kind of were all on the same page working toward a common goal.
And just curious, for the future residents or the people that were in those encampments, what was their initial reaction to this? I guess I don't know what you were presenting. Were you presenting like renderings of the site plan, or how are you communicating what was coming?
We all of that. We had site plans, we had drawings, we had pizza, right? So it was an opportunity to kind of bring them in and explain step by step of what this looked like, and the benefits, the pros and the cons, right, of why they should take advantage of this and what this looked like. So the conversations when people first heard it were like, nope. And there's some other choice words that I won't mention now, but
they were saying no to the site
cabins.
Plan, or just the concept of having a managed community
all of it
in the same site?
All of it. All of it. And people had their own views of what it looked like to them without it actually being up yet, right? So folks who have spent time in CDC, right? They were like, I don't want to live in a prison. Or folks who are dealing with mental health and substance abuse, I want to be able to kind of come and go as I please. And so we kind of looked at that and strategized, like, how do we make this low barrier? How are we able to address some of the issues that the residents are having, which is preventing them from coming in? What can we get away with, which will still be safe for the residents as well as the staff that was on site, right? So we kind of took all of that in. We even took in what the community's concerns were and what they wanted to see done. And we tried to incorporate all of those things and see how that was going to play out. So that's how we eventually won folks over, is that it was like, well, come in and see, right? It can't be any different from here. At least here you can lock your belongings. There's a key. There will be meals provided. There's clean water. There's porta potties, right? It's like, is it the best solution at this time, or versus permanent housing? No, but it is a solution and a step towards something different. So that was our messaging that we just kept kind of pushing to folks. So, and also identifying kind of the alpha leaders of that encampment, right? Because encampments have their own politics. So kind of speaking to that and talking to folks. And once we were able to get kind of the most skeptics to come in, then everyone else just kind of fell in line after that.
Was the skepticism based or associated with kind of this first theme that Talia had brought up earlier around the congregation or the congregate shelters not being fully utilized? Like, were people sort of thinking of the congregate shelters or the in-place shelters to date as sort of just this would be another type of or version of that?
I mean,
or was there
I
an
think,
association with that?
I think what was not known was not known, right? That's part of it. Like, I don't have any problem moving people into cabins today, 3 years later, and people know what it is and what it isn't. So unknown was just unknown, and there was uncertainty. I think that there was a fear around us misrepresenting, right? Some distrust of government or whatnot, right? Where you come in and you're like, look at this great thing. And you're like, what are you really selling me? And I think that there was a lot of learning from that first site. Our second site was much improved, right? So there were some legitimate complaints that came,
But also, if I could own it, it was a little bit of a confrontational interaction.
Yeah.
I'm coming as the city administration saying, we've got this program for you, but tomorrow we're closing down your encampment. You can't be here anymore. You can be there, but you can't be here. And I'm a white guy in a suit. And they're kind of like, up yours, dude. You know what? We're here. I've got, one of those alpha leaders at the encampment. She's like, I've got a 45-inch screen TV in my tent. I'm comfortable. And I'm like, well, I've got OPD and Public Works, and no, you're going to go. And we were screaming at each other in the middle of the street for an hour. And it didn't go very well. And then what's so funny is, like, some of the advocates brought her and a bunch of her group to the mayor's office. A couple hours later, I get a call from the mayor's office. You need to come down here and talk to these people. And so inside the mayor's office, we negotiated a kind of a truce. I'm like, all right, look, we're not going to give up on our plans. But they're like, well, you need to give us through the holidays at least before we move in. And the leader agreed to move in, if we agreed to wait and only close down, one half of the street and wait until after the holidays. January 4th, she got everyone, all of a sudden Tomika had a
She did.
And she's permanently housed now, and she's taking care of her grandchild who has nowhere to be. No, she's really, I think that's part of what we learned also is our approach to the community. We learned how to better communicate what the program is and what it isn't. Again, it's like and we said this all along, even in every community meeting, this is a pilot. We're learning and we're learning with you. And that was a key element, because even if a different municipality takes this on the road and does it in themselves, it's still a pilot there. And what we did isn't specifically like brand new, but it's brand new to Oakland, and we made it Oakland, right? We created something that we thought was the right fit for PR, and other municipalities would have to figure out what that sweet spot is for them.
The department was like, we don't really want to you're putting a temporary structure that's small enough that it doesn't require a building permit on a surface. You're exempt because of the declaration. So the building department was really hands off. The fire department was a little less so. We around the regulations with the fire department, but we looked at the state as well. And I don't remember exactly how we did this, but we appeased the fire marshal by adding the sheetrock, by showing that they were spaced apart, that we didn't need a sprinkler system. It'd be ridiculous to try to put a sprinkler system in. But honestly, we let the fire marshal and the fire department walk through the sites and look at actually, the state fire marshal has to approve our plans for the ones that are on Caltrans property. And they were very, very gracious about it. They knew what we were trying to do. They felt that the proposed safety regulations that we put in place would suffice, and they signed off on our plans. So when the state fire marshal is signing off on your plans, the local fire marshal is going to be kind of cool about it, right? And so we have a categorical exemption from CEQA, so we didn't have to do any real environmental review. We skated, and if we
didn't do it at the expense of safety and for persons. I just want to be clear about that, because I think that's been an accusation. So just to put it on the record, right? People's health and safety was not compromised. We got
no, it wasn't, because in fact at the sites there was a soil issue. We capped it. We got PSC approval on the state sites. We got water board approval on the Castro site. We did follow regulation. But we luckily, we did get pushed to the top of the list. I can be pushy.
No.
As some people know.
Relationships, you're giving them the information. There's a couple of things that actually, I think it was the fire department told us, and OPD said, make your staff units a different color, right? That was one thing that they were like, right off, we want to have a distinction between residential units versus staff units. And every single site thereafter has these blue units or staff units. That's been like standard. It's to create uniformities, and now they all know that those are the staff. It's just been so there was relationship, and they gave us good advice, right, to be able to make their job easier and bring more safety to our sites.
And for fire engine companies and police officers who work a beat, or public works people who work out there, they were like, thank God you're doing something, because these encampments are out of control. It's awful. Even if it's not perfect, you're doing something. And so people wanted to help us.
So we talk to each other frequently, and we problem solve, and we negotiate with each other. And I don't think all agencies and all cities have that kind of camaraderie with each other.
People in certain departments were able to see things done that they couldn't easily get done otherwise. Like I was able to provide storage containers for Alameda County, and the process they would have to go through to get that was problematic for them in terms of the schedule they had. And, I'd hear about it on Tuesday, and on Saturday it was delivered, and made them really happy that they were able to get something done like that without going through all of the normal steps that they would have to. And by doing little things like that, we built up a lot of credibility across various departments, and I think got a lot of cooperation along the way.
Something that can be repeated in other cities. So it sounds like, it takes obviously champions from the top that have the power to stick their heads out so that, various department heads and everything fall in line. Or if it's the state fire marshal sort of signing off on it, like you really sort of need the champions at the top to have the courage, I guess, to take on something that's sort of an unconventional typology or solution towards homelessness.
From my point of view, the mayor got, this was a pet project of hers, and she was the biggest cheerleader of all. And I think from the business community especially, she got a lot of attention for these projects herself. And Joe, I think, must be owed a million favors because he was able to call in favors.
Absolutely.
Here. And those two, I think between the mayor and Joe, that was a pretty dynamic pair to spearhead these projects through. They wouldn't have happened the way that they did without those two. That's
agreed.
Yeah, so that's like another component of the recipe is you have the champion, and then you have the sort of integrator,
the muscle,
the mortar between all of the bricks.
Again, unique to how Oakland does its work, or maybe unique to how I do my work. Being I'm a service provider sitting in the city is how I think about myself, and so there's that piece of it too. I think it's the pre-planning that we've done really well at, as we were doing this over and over. Oak Street was like a brief, I think all I did at Oak Street was like pick the color, and I was like, okay, everything's fine. And we walked the site a couple of times. It's just you get into good practice and you know what your best practices are. I think that was key. And yeah, I think it's about regular and constant communication. Jim creates these timelines and these plans ahead of time, so we're looking at it. He'll adjust them. That's the contractor, and he puts that stuff together. He knows how to move everything around, and understanding the provider has to have control of the site at least 7 days before opening, right? That's what we learned. And so Jim knows to work backwards, right? All of that kind of stuff is just part of what we learned. The ramp up plans for closures that go along with the opening, those are another set of people, like Public Works, Joe or Darielle now, right? But like the homeless management team is there. So there's like the ramp up to opening, and then there's the tipping point turns into this ramp up to closure of the street side encampments.
The agreement with the neighborhood, it was basically a contract with the neighborhood saying if we come, we went to pretty heavily impacted areas to solve the problem in that area for that population of people. So Talia and Tomika and others did a census of who was actually there, and they built radius, circles of invitation zones, I think they called them. And the idea was to stand the cabin site, serve that population of people, and then decommission the cabin site. And the contract with the neighborhood was, like Joe said, you let us come here, give us the room to help solve this problem, and then we will go away, and we will not let anybody come back. And that part of it has been a bit disappointing for me, because not only did we not decommission most of them, at least yet, but people are starting to re-establish encampments around the community cabin sites. And that's kind of hard to see, because I think the idea was to try to basically clean up neighborhoods from encampments. So, that was part of it, as crass as that sounds. Then the only real way to do that long term is to serve the population, to get people back onto a path of more sustainable living. So clearly we need.
Oh yeah. Well, I would say though that the one, I guess, metric that you can point to, because like I think when I asked about the mission of this was to end people's unsheltered status. It does do that, right? It's indisputable that the people that are in those shelters are no longer have an unsheltered status, right? So like, I guess how much of that point can you weigh on as far as like this is doing exactly what we said it would do?
Well, it does as long as they are moving through it was never meant for somebody to stay in a cabin long term. The idea is to give them a place off the curb into a much safer, much cleaner place where they could then be connected to whatever it is they need, whether it's healthcare, housing, jobs, whatever it is that got them where they are. It just gives them just a minute to be able to think and to breathe and to start regrouping and to kind of change the trajectory from down to up. And it does that when it's incredibly rewarding to see that actually happening, and it really is. And actually to go to Mandela or any of the sites, particularly the ones that Operation Dignity manages, they're incredibly well run, they're clean. And when it's just what they're actually doing for people it's incredibly rewarding for me to see. Many more next steps to that. Rather than just building endless community cabins, we need to really figure out what the next steps out of the community cabins would be and focus a bit more on that if we can.
Is this successful, you think, in changing the conversation in Oakland around now putting more pressure on the next set of sort of shelter solutions? Like, does it change the conversation around the need for affordable housing in communities, or how does that?
I think that it absolutely does that, and it's an astute point. And I think it's better than better. It's actually good. I mean, it actually is a very effective first step. The program is actually really, really effective at that because of those two things. It's a low barrier of entry, and it's not a high level of comfort. So it's the low barrier of entry gets you in there, and the fact that you then have all these connections to services, and once you kind of have a minute to recalibrate, it's a little bit easier to find that desire to help yourself onto the next rung.
Cabins is that next step, right? It's encampments and cabins. And what it does a couple of things in the cabins. It gives folks the opportunity to really kind of come in, close the door behind them, and actually rest, right? Most folks who move into the cabins, they usually sleep for 2 days before anything else happens, right? It's just that ability to come into a safe environment, close the door behind you, and know that you and your belongings are safe, right? So as Talia was saying, rest and respite, and also kind of giving them back those life skills, right? And reintegrating them back into society and reintegrating them back into permanent housing. Sometimes you can take a person directly from an encampment and put them in permanent housing, and it works. Most times it doesn't, right? Because homelessness that's one issue. It's all of these other things as well that plays into that. Mental health and substance abuse. So you can move them directly from encampment to permanent housing and not address the issues, and they won't sustain there. But at least with the cabins, it's that stepping stone, right? It gives them that opportunity to feel like what it is to be indoors again, right? And then we work on those life skills, like how to be a good neighbor. That's the purpose of having a roommate, right? Because you'll have neighbors that'll live next door that you may not get along with. How do you engage with them? You can't just go fight them or sick your dog or steal, right? You have to learn how to live in a community.
Well, yeah, and you reminded me that one of the themes that I wanted to touch on that I think it's important to highlight here is that, these are really meeting people that are experiencing homelessness where they are, like both from a geographic standpoint and from just where they are dealing with various personal problems or whatever else. From an operations standpoint, where do you see the biggest constraints or bottlenecks or challenges to going from 200 beds to 2,000?
I think Talia kind of touched on it. I think the cabins are a good option for a lot of folks, but again, there are some folks who wouldn't do well at cabins unless they were really specifically for them, right? Of it is going from 200 to 2,000 is fine, but if those resources aren't in place for those particular populations, it's going to be much more challenging.
We are generalist in the, it's like we cast the widest net possible. Is there room for creating some specialization? So we're trying that at Miller to be a workforce development site, because that's the specialization for that agency that runs it. And so that's literally just beginning piloting November 1. So we're just going to see. It's very informal. It's sort of like our contract, our scope, nothing's changed. We're just going to try this and see. I think to Tomika's point, a clean and sober site is another thing to meet people where they're at. There are people on the streets who are not using, who are trying to stay clean and sober. And so how do we create environments like our system in general is so low barrier, no questions asked. We take 290s, like there's all these things that the harm reduction is the frame. And part of the spectrum of harm reduction is abstinence. And so how are we serving that population and nurturing that as well? And so are we able to get people exited more quickly? And are they not returning to homelessness a year later? Right? Like that's really the question to me. For every one person we exit out of homelessness in Oakland, two become unsheltered. And so we need to catch, we're a constant catch up. We're always behind.
My plug-in about affordable housing, as I do in quotation marks, that actually has to be affordable for our population, right? Because our affordable housing here is not affordable for the residents that we deal with, right? And the guidelines that are in place doesn't really speak to the challenges that our folks have. Our folks have multiple evictions, they have criminal backgrounds, right? They have all of these other factors that will disqualify them from the traditional affordable housing, right? So when we're looking at housing, we're looking at supportive housing with wraparound services with the subsidy, right? That doesn't penalize them because of criminal background, bad credit, multiple evictions, and not making 3 to 4 times the amount of rent.
Refocus and do a lot more work on actually bringing people up and getting better jobs, just helping people get on a path to home ownership. I think there's a lot of opportunity that we're missing on that end.
Well, that will be part 2 of the next 2-hour conversation is going into the plethora of issues around building the permanent housing. Are there any other
think of a couple of things.
Yeah.
First of all, have running water. That's one of my biggest pet peeves about the site is have running water. I know that sounds crazy. I mean, we have mobile showers and porta potties, whatever. I just think having running water is a really nice thing.
Yes, it is.
You can avoid a site that's under 2 highways and a BART tracks or train tracks. That's also a nice idea. I'm just telling you, the vibe at a site that's next to a park versus under highways and trains tracks is different.
Paved site versus the unpaved.
Correct.
The big issue.
Hey, that was my next one. Pave your site.
Yeah.
Do not leave your site unpaved. Trust me, especially if you're in the Northwest and you have rain, you really need paved sites. I think the key to the success, honestly, is the recipe of the persons that are in the playroom, right? Like we all play well together. And I think it's this unified goal that we have is to be the most service to the most number of people possible, knowing we're not going to be able to serve everybody, but how do we do the most good for the most number of people? And it's also in that is knowing what's my lane, right? Tomika and her team are the operators. I'm like the conduit between all of this stuff, and I have some experience in it. I learned a lot from Jim about project management over the years, and I'm really grateful for that. So Jim's the contractor. He knows where to put a fence, right? It's really trusting. I think that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. It's trusting the team that you're with for the experts that they are. And I think the last piece is that you have to remain teachable to learn and get the feedback. Don't get so stuck in the this and like have your pride and ego attached to this project where you're unwilling to learn from it. It hurt my feelings that the first site's cabins were terrible, but I know that was my fault. I'll take ownership of that. I picked bad cabins. My role is to learn from it and move forward, and we can't not do that, right? That's really, I think, one of the really essential pieces. I think another thing is involve your cohort, have community meetings, be engaged with your on-site, because once you have your original cohort, you're gonna have people move in that don't all know each other necessarily, and you wanna keep that camaraderie and expectations and all of that in place. Those are the things that I think are the most important.
Making sure that the messaging of what you can and can't do is very clear on all sides so that there's no splitting, there's no contradiction, they're not contradicting each other. And that's from the very top to the boots on the ground, right? That we're all saying the same thing. We are one band, one sound, right? We're moving in unison so that so that our messaging is clear and we're making sure that folks are truly aware and our process is very transparent. We need to share, we need to talk, again, having those tough conversations.
In there that don't be afraid to just jump in and get after it. You know, the mayor did very early on and often said, don't be afraid to fail. And, you know, she cleared the path for a lot of things to happen. And Joe certainly did that. And that made a big difference. I mean, this would not have happened without that kind of leadership at the top. And each person on this conversation has stepped right in and done their part and wasn't afraid to just go for it.
Yep.
That really matters. And this problem, you know, whatever problem you have, I mean, it's true of almost any problem, but this one in particular, you will get yelled at, you will get blamed. Everybody already thinks the problem is unsolvable, and you're never going to get very much credit, but you're never going to get anywhere at all if you don't just go for it.
Oh, perfect. Well, this has been super enlightening, and you know, I really appreciate everyone's just sort of candid, honest conversation here. And I think this is a great, innovative example of a program that other communities can look to and sort of make it their own. Talia, Tomika, Jim, thank you so much for joining, and Joe from earlier. And I look forward to seeing sort of what the next iteration is of the 8th and 9th version. So maybe we'll have a part 2
Episode reunion.
Yes, the episode reunion. Yeah, that's exactly.